Right.
Get them.
Okay. Hi, y'all. I am very, very excited to very randomly and wonderfully be here this evening, my time, this morning, your time, Mick, with Michael McDonagh. He is a musician and an activator of spaces and a really cool, fantastic barista who used to make me coffee at the Press Book House before he disappeared from Newcastle, Australia, and went to Canada. And I haven't heard much from him since until I randomly messaged him about 10 minutes ago. So thank you for talking to me this evening, Mick.
That's right. I've just been waiting by the phone since I got here, so I was ready.
This is a little bit more, I am not as prepared with this interview as I have been for some, but I think we can wing it and it'll be all right. I guess I'll just start by, tell me a little bit about what brought you from Newcastle, Australia to Canada. Where are you in Canada? And yeah, tell me what your life has been like pre-coronavirus.
Pre-Rona. So it was my wonderful partner, Amy, who I'm sure lots of people know. And she's Canadian. And so I came over here. We moved into a town called Hamilton. I purposely left Newcastle from Hamilton train station so that I made the long trip from Hamilton to Hamilton. And so we moved in there in sort of October via England. And then we were living there for about 6 months, and I was working in a couple of cafes where it was funny. The cafe scene is very different in Hamilton, but that's a whole different thing. But
did you get tips? Did Canadians tip?
Yeah, a little bit. It was just funny. There was no room for my barista knowledge.
Oh yeah,
people didn't care.
That's right.
It's
we
like,
just
okay,
want
make
North
the
American
coffee machine didn't really work, and but it was all right.
You were like, if you only knew what I could do for you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The places I could take you. So we were there for a while, and Amy was sort of commuting out to work from there. She was working at a travel company, actually, did cruises. So she was doing lots of the writing for them. Like there's all sorts of, blogs and newsletters and all the sorts of stuff that goes out from there. So she was working in this big sort of cruise company, and they do like quite small trips. It's not one of the enormous cruise ship things. They go to sort of funny little destinations, and they go like around Iceland and Greenland and up north and through the.
I think I saw her tweet one of her stories. Yeah, she was doing cool stuff earlier this year. I was like, oh my gosh, that's awesome. I want that job. Yeah.
Yes. So we were right in it. And then I had sort of been looking for work because I finished uni not long before I left. And I did sort of development studies, and I'd been looking for work, and I didn't really have any luck. I didn't have luck looking for bloody barista work, let alone economic development. So I eventually, a job came up way up north in a little town, way like 11 hours north of Toronto. And then basically I took that. Sorry, is it all right if I bring us right up to coronavirus?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I sort of took that job. Before that, so Amy's job fell through because it was coronavirus had just started to sort of go ahead, and it was like a couple of days after they'd found out all the trips that they were going on, and that everyone at the company sort of goes on the trips and works on the boats, and they just found out everyone's getting excited for summer, and they've just been working towards this like all year. Everything that they've done was towards the summer cruise window, and then basically it all fell apart in a matter of days. Like it was like started to look a bit grim, but they weren't sure, and then it was like, okay, we've called a group meeting for Tuesday, and I thought, oh, and then just about everyone had to get let go because it was in that small gap before the sort of wage subsidies and everything kicked in. So they had to get rid of most people, and it was a small company that built up sort of slowly over years. So it was a huge like shock for them. Anyway, so Amy had lost her job there, and then I got a job way up north. So we sort of decided that we could move. And then, so that was for the end of April. That was sort of planned. And luckily we found someone to take over our lease and stuff. So that was fortunate. And then, so it was right in the middle of when you weren't sure what you could and couldn't do and what was going to happen. And then Amy's parents have a cottage a couple of hours north of Toronto. And we the plan was to stay there for 2 weeks, sort of do an isolation thing and then carry on up north. And then we ended up, the job fell through.
Oh no.
My job fell through. So a few days before we went to leave, I called him and I was like, right, I've got this house. Like I'm talk to the person, I was going to like sign a lease or whatever. Is there any reason that I should hold off? Because I still hadn't had I had a confirmation and signed a contract and everything, but I thought I'd check with him. He was like, oh yeah, I'd probably hold off. And the next week he told me that council decided not to go ahead with it because it was a lot of it was to do with working with people and all this. So it fell through. But it worked out really brilliantly because instead of 2 weeks at the cottage, we ended up having 4 months there, and it was incredible. So I was very lucky.
Is that where you are now?
No, so I did end up getting a job about 2 hours away from that town. So I'm now in Hornpain, Ontario, which is the geographic centre of Ontario, if that gives you an idea of where it is.
Vaguely, sure.
And it's, yeah. Just about. And it's so cool.
We don't know
it's a
that
tiny
much
place.
about Canada, but
yeah.
Figure it out. Yeah. Cool. Middle of Ontario.
So it's and it's about 1,000 people in this. So it's just like a small town, and it's quite isolated. It's about 100 kilometers south to the next town, and then a bit further north if you want to go north and east to get to Hearst. So it's like at least an hour drive to get to sort of any other place like that. And so it's a really wacky, interesting place to live. But every small community says that they're friendly, but they've really lived up to it. They are super, super friendly and welcoming. And even though it's a weird time to be here with COVID and can't really meet people, but it's been nice.
What is your work?
So it's with the township. So it's basically exactly the same job that I had that fell through. So it's the economic development internship with the township.
Okay, and I should have clarified.
Which is interesting because it's such a small place.
I should have clarified that at the beginning, economic development, because I knew that about you actually, and I had forgotten until you just reminded me. But that is also.
That's quite all right. It's
so
the least exciting part of me.
No. Right. So I'm so glad. So that's so cool. You were able to get work. Has Amy found work?
Yeah, so she's been freelancing. So that was sort of one of those funny things in life where you need a little push, a little coronavirus push. So because of that, she's out of the marketing sort of job that she had, right? That she enjoyed it to a degree, but there was also, lots of things that she wanted to do that she couldn't do because of it. And then, so she's been actually doing a lot of work, which is really great. She's got lots of sort of connections here. And so she's been doing lots of fact checking and writing and
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So you're
getting on just fine.
You're both employed in Canada despite it all. So that's pretty awesome. Even if freelancing is hard to kind of gauge sometimes, but that's still pretty good.
So it's also nice here too, I think, that we're up here because the cost of living is fairly cheap. Like the rent's quite cheap. Food's a little bit expensive, but it's totally fine. Like we have plenty of, we're just fine. So it's not like if you're living, in a big city and have enormous rent and it's like all this pressure for kids or something, and you've got all this pressure to have a regular paycheck. It's like.
Right. That's a good thing, I suppose. And also being in a remote place, I would imagine there's not been a lot of cases or probably the same amount of fear that might have struck some cities and stuff like that.
No, so there's been none here in actual Hornpain, but there have been some nearby and in the health unit, which is like the big geographical area. But they, so there is still, all of the laws and precautions and things like that, because I think otherwise if you get too lax with it, then it would just rip through here in a day. If it, someone gets it, it's just if people don't, there's lots of people don't take it seriously, and I just think like, if someone gets it, if someone goes through a drive and comes back with coronavirus, it could be in big trouble.
Do you
So I try to wear my mask.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. In Newcastle, I will see, and I try to, when I remember, to wear my masks in like the shops, but it's very, very good. It was bad, and it was good, and then it was uncertain, and now we haven't had for 6 weeks, I think, any cases in Newcastle. It's been great, but I guess in general, Canada. And I actually interviewed a nurse in I believe it was Ottawa earlier on. And I do know that you guys, like, it has been probably worse in Australia. So do you think people are taking it seriously? I read a lot about like the divide in the US, like the political side of like believing it or not. Do you feel like that has translated in Canada at all?
Yeah. I don't really know. Like, I think, yes, there is a lot, definitely like leadership wise, is taking it seriously. And like the mayor here has a, I don't know if it's weekly or fortnightly, like Facebook Live, where she chats with someone involved in the health district here, and they talk about it and they keep up to date on everything that's happening. And there's, signs on the businesses and that you're expected to wear masks when you enter and that sort of thing. But then it's that thing where not everyone seems to follow it or be interested in listening to any of that. Like there's lots of people that just don't, which is I don't know. It's a bit, so it's a bit hard. It's like you wonder what will happen if it comes here, but lots of people do, yes.
Yeah.
Like probably the majority, but maybe I just notice everyone that's not, and I just keep that in my brain.
Yeah.
So it feels like there's lots, but.
Yeah. Have you met anyone who's had it?
No, we had, when we were staying at the cottage, we made, we sort of knew them, but we made good friends with the couple of neighbors down there. And they're in their 70s and 80s. And so it was always quite like, we were very, very aware of trying not to get near them and that sort of thing. And they were as well, obviously. But we used to hang out, and we just made sure that we hung out outside around the dock and that, because I know one of those ladies had Linda, she had a bit of a scare, which we didn't really know her at that time. We sort of met afterwards, but she was sick for a few weeks and sort of thought it was, but then it turned out not to be. So then that was quite sort of sobering for her, I think. And and then her daughter's a nurse. So she said she gets in trouble if she does anything that is she's not allowed to.
That sounds so like
so her daughter keeps tabs on her.
Sounds like really lovely though, like a kind of escape in the woods for a little while. In the summer.
It was like the best 4 months. It was so nice.
Wow.
Oh, I was so lucky. And I just kept reminding myself how lucky I was. I know that was not the global experience of coronavirus.
No, of course.
For the summer on the lake, painting the boat and making paddles. And
I saw you making a boat on Instagram. Now, I wonder how when you planned, I remember you were planning to move to Canada. I didn't know the specifics of it, but did you have plans to come back to Australia this year at all? Like, was that something or anything like?
Well, I had no idea either which is probably why you didn't know, because I just sort of was coming over here, see what happens. And then this contract that I have is until August next year. And so, I mean, I don't even know, because I didn't plan to come back earlier, and it's been Corona for so long that I've just assumed that I can't for a long time. So like maybe I would have tried to for Christmas or something, but it just hasn't even crossed my mind, because since, April, it's been like looked impossible. And so I don't really know, because I didn't have specific plans, but I might have. And then it is tricky, actually. That's the hardest thing I think about being here, is that even when you're really far away, like with everything so connected, obviously it always feels like you're only ever like a flight away from where you need to be. Like if I needed to get home, if something happened, whatever, then you always have in the back of your mind that it's like you could get there in a couple of days if you really needed to. So that's a bit strange to not have that feeling, and to know that. And obviously you probably got exactly the same thing with your family in the States. It's like, it's quite scary really to know that if something happened, then too bad. you're not getting back for a long time.
Well, I think
for at least a while anyway.
Yeah, I think because you're an Australian citizen, from what people have told me, you would have to, like, there's a cap for people. Like, I think you would be able to come back, but you'd have to kind of make the cap for the week, and then you would have to, I believe you'd have to spend $3,000 to quarantine in a hotel. So it wouldn't be like you'd get to see if somebody in your family was sick or something like that. It's not like you could go to them straight away or anything. So yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah, sorry, that's probably an important detail. I was skipping over that. The reason why it's impossible. It's not literally impossible, but yeah, practically for me at the moment, it's just like, okay, what am I going to do? Take a month off work and spend $5,000 and maybe have the flight cancelled and like, so it's practically very difficult.
How does your family feel about that? Are they are they worried about you, or are they just kind of hanging in there like mine are? My family's kind of glad I'm in Australia. I think they feel like I'm safer in Australia than I am in the United States.
I don't know. Like, it's probably a bit funny there too, just knowing that. And I think Mum feels a bit maybe like I'm stuck here and like I'm going to stay longer. But that's Mum's she's always going to think that when I live somewhere else. So.
Fortunately, like we said, Canada has done pretty well. I've already kind of covered the healthcare and the I guess the ways that things have been done. But did you, I mean, I'm curious, you're in a very small town. You said people are wearing masks. Canada has good healthcare. I think they've been probably paying a lot of attention to the health guidelines. Did everything close? I guess you were in the cabin, so it didn't matter. You guys were just like living, but where you are now, what you said is
Hornpain.
Hornpain. Did are cafes open again? Are people like going about their normal day-to-day stuff as well?
Yeah, so I can't think of when it was, but there was reasonably recently they opened Ontario to stage 3 of the restrictions, which was where pretty much everything except like your big ticket items are open, like everything except, massive concerts and like buffet restaurants and things like that. There's a specific list of things that are still closed or like heavily restricted, but basically most things are open now. And that was probably a couple of months ago,
right?
A month or two ago, right. I don't know.
Right.
I'll look at the date and I'll be horribly wrong. But
no.
And so everything's been pretty open, and it was the same too when we're at the cabin. Like obviously the essentials were open, which is mainly what is in that little town called Halliburton, and so we could go in town and go to the grocery store and the hardware shop and all that sort of thing. And once we'd been there for a little while, we felt better about going out in the town. Like when we first got there, it was like that interesting divide, which they've had in Australia as well. I know about like this coming from the city to a rural area. People don't really want you there. And so it was a funny situation there in cottage country because we were sort of outsiders, right? And Amy's parents would come up quite often from Toronto. And so you've got this whole, and I think it's like 30-something% of the population, maybe even more. I shouldn't say percentages because I don't know. A lot of people in that area are from like a temporary residents that have cottages there, and there are people that live there all year round. But and so there was this sort of interesting time where there were people that didn't want them there and that, but then the mayor sort of had to come out and say something a bit more welcoming because they know that most of their tax dollars and that come from people from else. So it was a weird time. But it was also a lot of that like people literally didn't want you coming there, but it was that strange time where I think people lose sight of what is actually happening. Like if you drive in a car to your other house and you stay there and you bring your groceries or whatever and you pay attention to what's going on, then you're no more, I don't know, you're not putting anyone at risk. Like if you don't go meeting people. And the trouble is, I suppose, obviously that people don't do that. And if you go out to the shops or whatever, or decide not to pay attention to the rules, then, or if you get really sick and you get stuck there, then you go to their hospital instead of the one in the city. But I know Amy's parents sort of laughed and said, well, not laughed, they weren't. They laughed about this specific thing where they thought, well, if we got sick, the first thing we would be doing is getting in the car and going back to where they lived. Like they would rather go to the hospital at their local area rather than that one as well. So it was sort of, I don't know.
It's interesting.
So so they sort of kept coming up.
Yeah, it's interesting. And now I think like the restrictions are easing again in New South Wales, and I'm kind of excited because I want to explore more. Like after the bushfires as well, I'm kind of interested in exploring more of these local places that have been damaged in many different ways. But yeah, it's funny because when people feel uncertain about things, I think they go in like mentally, they don't like the idea of like, it's really interesting how this virus has affected people's attitudes and trust. I think in some ways, like you want people to be like more caring and loving than ever, but I also understand people like, getting angry and worried, and that's, I think it's understandable, but I hope that we can, I hope that it's finally going to be we're going to be able to open up again and things are going to get better again. I guess, I hope, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, cause I had a little break in the middle of, when was that? I don't even remember. I have no idea what time was, but at some point in that cabin time there in the 4 months of summer, I went to a friend's farm who, like Amy worked with a friend at that company, and then her family have a farm. And so I actually went out there because I wasn't up to much. I went out there for 2 weeks and did like a woofing thing and just went and worked on a farm for 2 weeks. And so that was fun. And that was like I get quite nervous about Corona, and I'm all about, trying to wear a mask and keep distance and that, just because I'm not even worried about me. I'm just so scared of getting someone else sick and finding out that I caused some horrible death spiral. And but it was really nice because I went to that farm and we'd been at the cottage. Like I was pretty, confident that I was okay because I hadn't seen anyone and it was only Amy and I. So we went over there and they were very lax about it at the farm. I say lax, but it was a regional area where there weren't many cases, and it was like the family that lived on the farm, so they had reason to be lax about it. But they weren't too worried about it, and that was like a super nice reprieve. That was like going back into pre-corona. It was like, and no one was sort of terrified of you, and we all just hung out and hopped in the car together and all this sort of stuff. But
what was the name of
and
the
then
farm?
I was the most nervous about it. I was Vibrant Farms.
Vibrant Farms.
And they did like organic beef was like the main thing that they did there, and then but they had lots of other animals and projects and things that they were doing.
Cool.
And vegetables, not just.
Yeah. You've had some like backcountry adventures.
Yeah, it's been very, very cool. I've embraced rural Michael.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of another question. That's cool. I didn't know that you went off and woofed for a little bit. But does rural Michael get a chance to play guitar or do any live music or anything like that?
No, I have done almost none. Like since the Rona, I had a little bit before that, but I mean that's also a nice excuse for me because I tend not to push that anyway, so I haven't had the chance. But I keep saying that I'm going to set up a little microphone and do a thing here, but I haven't.
I would love that.
Probably will. I'll try to this week. He's Justin Townsend, my musical idol.
Yes.
Recently. So I wanted to do like a cover thing of his anyway.
Well, this would be this is good motivation now that you've said it out loud. We have a record of it, so you have to do it. I just thought of something else. So I have not spoken to that many people about the economic side of the pandemic at all. And I guess you kind of have a background in that actually.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about like, what do you think about like what's going to happen? What have you been thinking about from the economic perspective? Like what are your fears? What are your hopes? Talk to me about that.
I'll firstly say too, which I have pointed out yet, personal, financial, economic level. The reason, maybe, I don't know if all Canadians will love hearing this, but the reason of this is because of the CERB, they've called it here, the Canadian Economic Response Benefit, I think it was called.
Yes.
which
Okay.
is like the welfare thing. They sort of replaced, because they had an EI system. It was similar to Australia, where the current welfare system was not up to scratch, like it wasn't ready for that many people, and the application things, the boxes you had to tick were very different. And so they really, really quickly got that sorted here in Canada and got money to people very quickly. They just made a flat rate. They said if you've earned, there was like stipulations. It's like you had to have earned, I think it was $5,000 or something in the last 12 months. You had to have been working and earned at least $5,000. I think that was it in the last year. And there was a couple of other sort of restrictions, whatever, but they actually opened that up to foreign workers as well. So I got the welfare payment here in Canada, which is why I was able to weather not having a job for 4 months, because otherwise that would have been next to impossible.
Which is interesting because I just interviewed.
And I wouldn't have qualified for the existing.
No, go ahead. No, well, like,
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a lag, but I interviewed a backpacker in Australia. She's from Uruguay, and any backpackers or anyone who's not a permanent resident or a citizen got no financial assistance at all, which was actually like backpackers don't have that much money to begin with. And the hospitality jobs were like diminishing, and that's what a lot of them rely on. So that's so progressive and amazing that you're not a resident, right? You're just are you on a working holiday? Is that no? Okay, or a partner visa?
Yeah.
Okay, you're on a working visa and you are able to get benefits.
Yeah. So I saw that back home, and it's been, it's funny because Australia, gets so much money from tourists and from international students, especially. They've left and right, like you can't study and they can't get money and all this, it's been awful. So I was very, very grateful and surprised to get that, but it does make sense, because you invite foreign workers into your country and then you just, I don't know, expect them to disappear when you don't want to spend money on them. I don't know.
How much money was it? Did the Canadian government give to people?
It was $2,000 per month, so approximately $500 a week. Which
wow, that's
so
pretty
it
good.
was quite good, and they got it to you very quickly. It was like you called up a number. They had just a number, whatever, with an automated answering thing. You put in your SIN number, your details, whatever, and then I had a check for the first one, so it took about a week. But from then on, after I had my bank account linked with the tax department, you called up the number, you pressed the buttons, you said okay. It took about 3 minutes, and then within 2 days, you had $2,000 in your bank account.
Wow, that's even more generous.
So it was like they really, really, really did well.
That's great. That's great. And is that still available to people now?
I think so. I could be wrong about it. So it was one of those, and so I stopped obviously once I stopped, so I don't know. But I think it was one of those things they originally said for 4 months or something. They gave it a time limit, and then they've since extended it. And now I think there's pressure on them again to extend it again, because like you said, I think really importantly, the types of jobs that have been lost, it's not equal. It's the lowest paid workers in the least secure jobs that have lost the most throughout the coronavirus. So, and I've lived that in my personal experiences. I saw a graph that showed exactly that. There was just kind of a straight line correlation between money you earned and losses, and it was the less money you earned, the more likely you were to lose your job, basically. Yeah. And I thought that was funny, and we saw that basically within our little family group. It was Amy's got a brother and her parents, and then with me there was the 5 of us, and Amy was in the sort of you wouldn't have thought it was too precarious in normal times, but in the travel industry, obviously everything just gone completely, lost the job. And then she was working from home for a short time in the little couple of weeks where they didn't know what was going to happen. And I lost my job almost immediately, because I was just a casual in a cafe that doesn't matter to anyone with absolutely zero protection or whatever. And then Amy's brother was in insurance, and he was just working from home. And Amy's parents, similar thing, as insurance and in a management sort of job. And so they had adjusted, and they were working from home, and things were different, but they hadn't lost it. That was quite funny to see it play out exactly as
Yeah. Yeah. And and what do you think, from a more global perspective? It's really interesting because I understand that even in the wealthiest of countries, not everyone is able to get access to money. I know that some people in the United States are still waiting for checks, but also it's really like talking to my friend Orlando in Mexico about how the government did absolutely nothing, and some of his coworkers have had COVID-19, and it's just so. And he's in a relatively I guess he's in Baja California, so he's not even the main part of Mexico. So I don't know. Do you feel you can kind of comment on how this is going to impact the world later on? Do you think the subsidies from the government are a good thing that are going to keep people going? Do you want to offer up any thoughts on that?
I do. I would love to. I just quickly on the healthcare. It's been offered. I think because it's province based in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
like state by state kind of health rules and regulations. So in Ontario, from what I understand, I don't have I do now that I have a full-time job, but before that I didn't have healthcare, so I had my travel insurance. But then, of course, travel insurance doesn't cover anything at all to do with coronavirus. Like anything that's slightly linked to it is just an immediate no, which is fun. So they actually offered, I think, in Ontario to cover COVID costs if you're a foreigner or a immigrant, like whatever, if you're not covered by the provincial system. And so that was good too, because there was a bit of panic there for a while where I was thinking oh God, can I even stay? Because if I got it or whatever and then had to go to hospital or something, then would that just be $50,000 in debt for Mickey? But so they brought out that you could get Corona healthcare, and then I actually got a COVID test, which they said that it was free, and then I ended up getting they called me looking for my insurance details and stuff, and I'm halfway through that. The insurance agreed to pay $200 of it or something, and it was $550 for a COVID test. So They paid some of it. From what I understand, though, I think she was saying that they will then just bill the provincial government. I don't think they're going to chase me for it, but they might. So who knows? But I think healthcare for COVID is meant to be free. I think they just check with insurance, and then they needed to see that it didn't cover it, or if it did, how much, and then they take that. They try insurance first, basically, I think is the idea, which makes sense. But economic-wise, so I studied at University of Newcastle before they kicked out all the interesting subjects. They used to teach MMT, which is like a modern monetary theory, which is called heterodox economics as opposed to orthodox economics, and it's quite a new branch of economic thought, which is more sort of based in it pays more attention to the way that money moves in the system and where it comes from and that sort of thing. So I am heavily to one side of the argument on what governments should do. And for anyone that is interested, the best sort of way to get into it, there's a book by Stephanie Kelton, which was out recently, called The Deficit Myth, based on the US, but it talks about countries like Australia and Canada and the US that have their what's called a fiat currency. So basically the idea is that as we've seen in the coronavirus, they have the capacity to spend when they want to, these guys, because they issue the currency. And so it's not taxpayers' money in any sort of way that we understand it, because, they didn't go out and tax people first. We've been hearing for years and years in Australia, for example, about debt and deficit and all the problems with that and how we need to get to a surplus. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to afford anything, right? That's been the constant rhetoric since before and during the GFC. And so if you listen to that, you'd think that we were in peril, right? That we couldn't afford to do anything because we haven't had these surpluses that we need to spend. And then all of a sudden, the worst possible thing in the world happens. And then they snap their fingers and pass legislation, and they spent the money that they needed to on the wage subsidy and on the massive increase in welfare. And they were able to do it without lifting a finger, right? And so I think that was interesting enough in itself. And then the Liberal government have completely shifted from where they were before the financial crisis. When Labor were in power, it was a terrible thing that they were spending money and it was reckless. And now, of course, they've done exactly the same thing.
Are they, my economics knowledge is pretty bad. Are they printing money? Like, or are they just like... Yeah.
Basically, but the idea of the modern monetary theory is that like that happens anyway. Like any time that the government spends, it's just that's what they're doing, is they're just creating money. And there's actually an interesting sort of data out now. Again, I'm going to try and avoid saying the percentage, but I saw the other day, for example, in Canada, I think of all sort of debt, which they do denominate as debt, like they sell bonds, and so it counts as debt in their accounting. But of all new debt issued by the Canadian government since, I think it was since the coronavirus, something like December has been bought. The central bank, God knows the central bank, and then they just pay it back, and it just, like it doesn't involve anybody, private sector. It's the, so they're literally already doing that. Like it's not some terrible idea. It's not a prescription of what to do. It's sort of trying to explain how things work normally. And there are different limits.
The central bank of, is that in Canada, or is that like a universal?
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah, so of Canada. So they're basically, it's sort of trying to explain how things work normally. And that's the normal sort of process for spending money. And so that there are real limits to what you can spend, but that those limits are not a number. They're not like a financial limit like in Australia. You know, we saw that they would have you believe that the government were in a terrible, dire position and that Labor had ruined everything, and then all of a sudden the worst thing in the world happens and they have as much money as they needed to spend their way through it. And yeah.
Why do you reckon some countries have been able to provide more financial assistance than others then? Like, why do you reckon that like Latin American countries or African countries are not doing the same?
Yeah, so I have to admit there that I don't have too many answers on that, because that's something that I've been needing to basically learn more about, because a lot of the MMT world is based in the fiat currencies like Canada, Australia, the UK, Japan, etc. And so there are reasons that they are able to spend compared to everywhere else. But then there's barriers to getting to that stage, which I don't understand a whole deal of how a country gets out of that, because obviously, if you're Colombia, then you don't have the capacity to just spend and it can go really pear-shaped. But basically the point is,
no, go ahead.
So the major thing that I do know that from that is that there are differences, and basically in mainstream sort of economics, you're not told that. And so countries in the European Union, they don't control their own currency. So like Greece and Spain, things, after the financial crisis, there was all sorts of horrible repercussions there. And that's partly because they didn't have the ability to control their own currency. And so they weren't able to spend counter-cyclically, which would slow the decline. Whereas in countries that do control their own currency, you are able to spend counter-cyclically when you want to. And when you're able to.
You don't have to worry about I feel like people might bring up inflation or the problem with money losing its value. You don't reckon you have to actually worry about that?
But yeah, so it is the interesting thing about that approach is that it's like the main, and I'm sorry that I'm probably the first person that anyone has heard talk about this, so I would encourage anyone that's listening right now to go and listen to people that know MMT.
I don't know a lot of people that talk about this, so it's really interesting to me.
It's interesting because obviously inflation is actually the big one that's sort of hurled at anyone that says anything about spending money, like the academics as well. That's all that they sort of seem to get in response. But MMT is interesting because it puts inflation actually as the most important thing. It's sort of the center of policy making, because that's what they recognize as real limit in the economy, is what is capable of being produced. And the example in coronavirus was, I heard Stephanie Kelton saying that, you have this ability to spend money and you're able to buy anything that you want that's for sale in America, in the US, for example, the government. But that doesn't mean that you can have unlimited doctors or PPE and that sort of thing. Like if it's not available and if it's not really manufactured, then you can't make it exist. So you still need policy and still need planning and you still need to make decisions based on your needs, and inflation is a real obstacle. But they sort of put that as the center rather than sort of dallying around it and trying to control it with interest rates.
Right.
Or just not spending because you're so scared of doing something wrong.
Well, this is interesting. I'm going to have to do some Googling.
Yeah, please. So I'm sure that I've misrepresented some things. So anyone that is actually
this is just really cool. Just a little taste of it, Michael. It's great. It's really cool.
And there's Stephanie Kelton is a great person. She's a really great sort of communicator of it. And she's one of the most prominent voices at the moment. So she'd be a good place to start for anyone that's interested.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I did want to ask, this just crossed my mind. So obviously in the United States, there have been a lot of protests about a lot of different things. There have been protests around the world. I'm feeling, my gut instinct is that there probably hasn't been a lot of protesting in a really tiny Canadian town.
Correct. Not since I've been here.
Yeah, right. So you guys haven't seen any, Canada's been relatively, I did see there was a shooting early on, like some sort of crazy shooting, I think, in Canada, like back in March or something like that. But that's like the only, like in terms of any type of unrest or anything like that, that's the only thing that I've heard about. So has Canada been relatively peaceful, you feel like?
I think so. Where I have been anyway, I think there have been protests like Black Lives Matter protests and movements and marches and things like that. But where I have been, it's all been very very tranquil. I've had a very peaceful COVID-19.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm honestly, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm glad that you and Amy are doing all right, and that you've been woofing and you've got a cool job now in your field, and you're not making coffees anymore. You're putting your brains to work. So that's great. Mick, is there anything else you want to say or add? Any silver linings? I mean, you've had a lot of silver linings. Like, I feel like you've kind of had an idyllic, and I'm so happy that you have, because I mean, it hasn't been the case for some people. So it's like I think that's good that you've been able to do that. It's really special. And is there anything else you want to say?
I don't know. I don't think so, I suppose. But yeah, we've been very lucky, and I haven't forgotten that at any point through it.
No.
I don't know that this could have gone very different ways. And so I guess in that way, I'm quite grateful to Canada in that sense, because without, welfare and the option of healthcare there if it's needed, then yeah, I would have had to leave.
And had Amy been in Australia with you, alternatively, she would have had a harder time. Right?
Yeah, I have no idea what would have happened.
Yeah, because it seems that so far it's worked out for the best despite all the odds. So congratulations, and keep us posted, and please live stream some Justin Towns. Was it Justin Towns Earl? Is that his name? Yeah, play some
I'm gonna have to now.
Yeah, it's on the books. All right, thanks so much for talking to me, Mick. I appreciate it. So good to see you.
Thanks, Alma.